of the global and regional politics of climate change and energy transition. The book is titled Dismantling Green Colonialism, Energy and Climate Justice in the Arab Region. And we are delighted to have a group of the book's authors and editors as our guest speakers today. And I'd like to provide a short introduction of them. Our first speaker is Dr. Hamza Hamouchene. He is an Algerian researcher and activist based in London. He is the founding member of Algerian Solidarity Campaign and Environmental Justice North Africa and North African Food Sovereignty Network, SIADA, and he is currently the Arab Region Program Coordinator at the Transnational Institute, ANI. His work is focused on the issues of extractivism, resources, land and food sovereignty, as well as climate change. And our second speaker is Asmaa Mohamed Amin. She is an energy engineer and specialist based in Jordan. She is dedicated to advancing renewable energy solutions with a strong focus on developing innovative strategies and conducting impactful research. She has been at the forefront of projects that drive sustainable practices in the region. And our last speaker is Mohamed Gad, and he is joining online. Mohamed is a researcher in international finance and political economy. After 20 years in economic journalism, he is currently transitioning his focus towards economics. He has worked with various media outlets and published research with the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights and the Arab Reform Initiative. Gad also has edited and co-authored books analyzing the contemporary political economy of Egypt and published by Al-Maraya. Now I will give the floor to our first speaker,
Thank you, Mohamed Gad, for the introductions. I'm really happy to be with you today. For coming to listen to some of the arguments that we're going to share about this book, Dismantling Green Colonialism, Climate Justice in the Region. We have some copies, we're waiting for them to in Arabic and in English, but the book is also available in open access, so we can take copies. They are free just by donations only to the Hassan Abu Sitta Children's Fund dedicated for the children of Gaza. So this book tells a story. In fact, tells many stories. Stories of injustice, stories of colonial dynamics, stories of land grabs, but also it tells stories of resistance, stories of hope for the future, the sustainable future that we want, the future of liberation, sustainability. But before I'll tell you a little bit about the book in minutes, very short time, but I'll do my best. I want to draw your attention to two things. First of all, the title of the book, Dismantling Green Colonialism, but also the picture of the cover. So when we talk about, and I say this in all the talks about my book since the setup, when we talk about colonialism, green or otherwise, about dismantling economies, about decolonization, about climate justice in the Arab region and beyond, we cannot do so and turn a blind eye to the reality of genocide. Committed by the deeply racist settler colonial state, apartheid of Israel, with the active support, complicity, and participation by Western imperialist powers. The United States, to the European Union, to the UK, to France, to Germany. We cannot talk about decolonization and forget, the material struggle for the people. You belong to the well, and mainstream Western academic spheres, we talk about decolonization all the time. Decolonization has become, maybe somebody needs to, so we cannot talk about decolonization and forget about the fate or the material struggle of people. Palestine need to be at the center of this when we talk about climate justice, liberation in the Arab region. So I think that's the main point that we talk about. And there is a wonderful chapter around Palestine, around decolonialization and greenwashing sector colonialism that Israel is using it to present itself as this, eco-friendly environmental stewards, helping its neighbors in desalination technology and sharing renewable energy projects and so forth. The second thing is about the picture of the book. So the picture of the book is of some Moroccan women specifically in southeast Morocco, a village called Imida. Imida has been a site of a very inspiring and iconic environmental struggle, an anti-extractivist, let's say, anti-extractivist socio-environmental conflict against the silver mine, which is one of the biggest silver mines on the African continent. That struggle has been ongoing for decades, and the people of Imida in 2011 specifically, managed to set up a kind of a camp that stopped a water pipeline that goes to the silver mine. People of Imida complain that that silver mining development that the state of Morocco is talking about is not bringing development. It's just bringing destruction, poor infrastructure, no jobs for the local populations, poverty, and also taking their land and taking their water. Why did we choose specifically that picture? We choose specifically that picture because around that area in the southeast of Morocco, there is a big renewable project, a solar plant called Ouarzazate, that has been perpetuating or entrenching the same extractivist practices of taking the land away of people, building those, sustainable green development projects, but not really bringing development of people, but excluding them. So we wanted to show the continuities between the old-fashioned extractivism in fossil fuels and mining and the new dynamics of green extractivism and green colonialism. There is an opportunity to move towards renewable energy and to sustainable development, but it shouldn't and it mustn't happen at the expense of local people by creating new sacrifice zones on their land. So these are the two main things that I wanted to say about the title and the cover of the book. The book goes into many case studies and many contexts. So it talks about Algeria, it talks about Morocco, Western Sahara, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, Jordan, Palestine, the Gulf countries. So it covers a large set of countries in the region and goes into various dynamics. The idea, first of all, is to deepen our analysis about what is taking place in the field of energy and in the field of energy transition, to know who are the main actors, who benefits, who loses at the expense of whom, but also to provide a kind of an alternative framing to the energy transition. We use the framing of just transition. Why do we offer that framing? Because we saw that most of the knowledge, or let's say the majority of knowledge and analysis and report that is being produced around energy, about the climate crisis, about the environmental and ecological crisis, about energy, is produced by international neoliberal institutions, like the international financial institutions, the IFIs, the World Bank, the IMF, but also international development agencies. International development agencies like the German corporation, the GIZ, the USA, the French corporation, These actors are really active in producing that kind of knowledge, organizing conferences in various languages, including in Arabic. But these institutions are biased to the people who have power and the people who have wealth. Their analysis does not take into account questions of class, race, gender, power, and colonial history. The solutions that they propose, first of all, they are top-bottom solutions. They come from the so-called experts, excluding local communities and local workers, but they are based on market mechanisms. So they encourage and push for further privatizations. Privatizations of everything. Privatization of the land, privatization of water, energy, and even in the atmosphere for the so-called carbon trading and carbon markets. So the book is trying to provide a counterweight to this dominant neoliberal and neocolonial narrative by, first of all, centering the voices of scholars, researchers, and activists and communities from the region, and trying to think about that just liberating alternatives. And here we ask fundamental questions. Energy for whom and energy for what? We need to ask, are those projects being built, or this sustainable development project, are they being done in the interest of the local populations, or are they done to export cheap green electricity to Europe? Most of the time, a lot of the projects, including green hydrogen and the big solar plants and wind farms that are being planned in Tunisia, in Morocco, in other countries in the global south, the idea is to export energy. So Europe has its own energy security and reaches its own climate targets while externalizing the social, environmental, and health costs to countries in the global south. That is what we call green neocolonialism or green carbon. There are various sections in the book. So first of all, we'll talk about unequal exchange and green colonialism and green grabbing in certain countries. The second section talks about privatization and the liberalization of the renewable energy sector with the involvement of international financial institutions. And I believe that Asmaa and Gad maybe will tell you more about this. And the third section talks about the challenges and the difficulties of an energy transition in big fossil fuel producing countries, the Gulf countries and Algeria in this case. But the chapter by Adam Hania summarizes it very well, saying that the Gulf countries, specifically Gulf capital, is going to constitute a huge challenge for the global climate justice agenda and for our efforts at just transition. So please get a copy for yourselves. There is a wealth of information there, and we hope that the book is just an opening to a discussion, that we need to take these discussions, global discussions, seriously. Climate impacts are here, and there are a lot of projects and agendas that are being dictated on us that we need really to scrutinize, reject, but at the same time, give our own solutions that really work for our own development and rooted in justice and sovereignty. Thank you for listening to me.
فرانسو هوا يعني موجود اليوم هنا بحب على فكرة أحكي بالعربي يعني معك 10 دقائق أحاول أستخدمهم من الأفكار تبعي بالأسلوب الكتاب تمام. الشابتر تبعي كان بالتركيز على الانرجي سيكتور جوردن قطاع الطاقة الأردني. هلا أنا بلشت الكتاب أو الفصل في الكتاب من واقع تفجيرات خط الغاز المصري الأردني اللي كان يورد لنا غاز اللي كان يولد لنا غاز كنا معتمدين عليه 85% من energy needs electricity energy needs في الأردن. بعد الواقعة التفجيرات وانخفاض كمية الغاز لحد ما توقفت في عام 2013 بلشت تكاليف الطاقة في الأردن بالارتفاع بشكل هائل، سببت لنا خسائر مليارية في الأردن، واللي هو كشف سياسات قطاع الطاقة مثل إنها سياسات مبتدئة متراجعة، إنها في كثير من الأحيان خاطئة. فإحنا حاولنا أن نقدم تحليل في الكتاب إنه مش أزمة 2011 مش التفجيرات هي اللي سببت كل هاي في القطاع، إنما كمان سياسات على مدة سنوات كثير طويلة هي اللي تدخلت مع مشكلة قطاع الغاز، واللي كانت احنا ركزنا فيها على خصخصة قطاع الطاقة اللي كانت عبء مالي على الحكومة الأردنية بسبب الأرباح الهائلة اللي كانت تحققها البرايفتايزد كومباني هاي بسبب العقود الموجودة، واللي هي كانت من ضمن سياسات صندوق النقد. هون عندنا الخسائر في الأردن في فترة انقطاع الغاز المصري بين 2011 و2013، هون كانت ذروة الانقطاعات. فيما بعد بلش يتحسن عندنا الوضع لما احنا بلشنا نجيب مصادر أخرى من الطاقة. بعد 2011 يعني كان في عندنا مفهوم أمن الطاقة جديد في الأردن اللي هو بيركز على تنويع المصادر. هلا تنويع المصادر اللي كان عندنا طبعا في البدايه احنا اضطرينا للجوء لصندوق النقد حتى نغطي البروسيس اللي كانت موجوده في الاردن. الدخول سياسات صندوق النقد كانت تعتمد هاي المره او بشكل هاي المره انه رفع السبسيديز عن المحروقات وعلى الطاقه بشكل اساسي، وكمان دفعت باتجاه تنويع مصادر الطاقه في الاردن. بناء على ذلك دخل الأردن في مجموعة كبيرة كثير من مصادر الطاقة، مصادر الطاقة الجديدة، وكانت للأسف ما كانت مدروسة، كانت ضخمة للغاية، أغلبها كانت مليارية ضخمة وتكاليفها عالية جدا. فإحنا عندنا دخل مصادر جديدة من الغاز كانت هي دخلت في الاتفاقية الإسرائيلية الأردنية على الأردن. بعد هيك عندنا الصخر الزيتي اللي هي محطة حرق مباشر للصخر الزيتي في جنوب شرق الأردن اللي هو غطى لنا 15%، وكمان دخلت عندنا ريسورس جديد اللي هو الطاقة المتجددة. الآن أول اتفاقية دخل فيها الأردن كان اتفاقية الغاز، وقعت عام 2000 وكانت في مشاورات 2015 وقعت عام 2016 رغم الرفض الشعبي الواسع لهذه الاتفاقية، لكن الأردن مضى قدما فيها قدمت الرواية الرسمية إنه هذا الخيار هو الأمثل والأرخص دون اعتبارات أن الطاقة اللي إحنا أصلا وقعنا فيها من قبل. الإشارات والدراسات تشير إنه هذا القرار كان خاطئ لما يحدث هذه الاتفاقية من غموض في تفاصيلها التعاقدية الفنية الهندسية، كمان وجود ثغرات قانونية ممكن إنها تكون منفذ للجانب الإسرائيلي للانسحاب من الاتفاقية، يكون الأردن مهدد من جديد بقطع الغاز، قطع التيار الكهربائي وتبعات هذا الموضوع. المشروع الثاني اللي احنا ذكرناه اللي هو مشروع متعدد الجنسيات ضخم جدا في الاردن، قرابه من 2.5 مليار الى 3 مليار دولار راح يكلف. لاستغلال الصخر الزيتي في الحرق المباشر بضبط 15% من الحمل الكهربائي في الاردن، لكن هذا المشروع اكتشفنا فيما بعد انه مشروع مكلف جدا، بيكلف الاردن 200 مليون دولار سنويا، راح تشكل على شكل خسائر تتحملها الميزانية العامة للدولة. رحنا للتحكيم الدولي حتى احنا نخفض من التكاليف، لكن للأسف خسرنا القضية. ودائما هنالك في مشاورات في اتفاقيات الطاقة مع المستثمرين، لكن للأسف دائما تجرح نحو المستثمرين، هذا إما لضعف التعاقدات، دائما التعاقدات فيها قوة من الجانب الاستثماري منها. فكان الأردن دائما يكون ضحية إنه هو هو بتحمل تكاليف هاي المشاريع الضخمة. الآن آخر مصدر من المصادر اللي احنا ناقشناه في الكتاب هو مصدر الطاقة المتجددة. احنا عندنا 30% contribution تبع renewable energy بالانرجي ميكس، لكن هذا الرقم اللماع كان من وراءه انه احنا عمقت renewable energies بالاردن، الفاينانشال لوسز بالاردن لاسباب كثيره، منها انه لما انفتح باب الترخيص للشركات الخاصه او الضخمه لجأت هاي الشركات انها تتبنى الطاقه المتجدده حتى تبطل تدفع اسعار طاقه مرتفعه. استفادت من الطاقه المتجدده لتعاظم ارباحها، استفادت من الشبكات الكهربائيه لانه ما كانت في فيز عائده يعني عادله مع موضوع عليهم حتى يكون في سعر استخدام للشبكات الكهربائيه. اهلكوا الشبكات الكهربائيه ايضا. الفاينانشال لوسز كانت حائل دون ان يكون في توسع بالانفراستراكشرز للشبكات الكهربائيه، فهذا كمان عمق المشكله بزياده. كمان حجزوا فرصه كبيره من الطاقه المتجدده واستيعاب الشبكات للطاقه المتجدده، فما عاد في امكانيه لاستيعاب جديده من الطاقه المتجدده اللي هي الان الصغار المستهلكين ينظروا لها او هم بيطلعوا لها في المستقبل. فهاي هي كانت مشكله الطاقه المتجدده من جهه، من جهه ثانيه انه القطاع التوليدي المتضخم في الاردن بسبب كل هذه المصادر التوليديه سببت لنا مشكله انه لسنا بحاجه لموارد توليديه جديده، فما عاد في حاجه للطاقه المتجدده في الاردن، رغم انه هي اسعارها منخفضه جدا منافسه جدا، ممكن ان تخفض تكاليف الى اقصى حد ممكن. فعشان هيك احنا عندنا خسائر القطاع من الطاقه المتجدده كبيره جدا، وهو اللي بيطرح السؤال اللي حكى عنه حمزه حول عداله ادخال الطاقه او مين المستفيدين فعلا من الطاقه المتجدده في بلادنا. هل هم الحاضرين للدخول للنوافذ التمويليه خاصه هاي الانظمه ممكن تكون مرتفعه الثمن نسبيا، فهي مش موجوده العداله انه يكون كبار المستهلكين او كبار الشركات هي الجهات اللي قادره على انها توجد نوافذ تمويليه تحقق منها تمويل تستغل الطاقه المتجدده دونا عن صبغات المشتركين يكون عندهم فاينانشال ريسورسز حتى ينفقوا هاي المصادر. اخر شغله كانت عندنا في الكتاب اللي هي الحلول اللي احنا طرحناها، حلول تكامليه على مستوى المنطقه بالربط العربي، ممكن اللي هي احنا بنسميها كمان الديسنتراليزيشن اوف انرجي، انه بدل ما تكون محطات خبره استثماريه وتكون النمو عمودي يكون افقي، انه احنا نحاول ننشرها بشكل صغير بكل يعني بشكل واسع، بدل ما انها تكون محطات سنترلايز مكلفه استثماريه مكلفه متعبه للشركات للشبكات. كمان تكامليه هي الربط الكهربائي ممكن يعزز من مستوى الشبكات الكهربائيه. اخر شيء احنا هنا في الفصل من الكتاب اللي هي اتفاقيه تبادل الطاقه بين اسرائيل والاردن، اللي هي اسرائيل بدها منها 900 ميجا، احنا ناخذ منهم مياه محلاه. احنا كنا شايفين انه هاي نقطه بدايه انه نحاول انه نوقف هذه الاتفاقيه حتى ما يكون هنالك مزيد من التطبيع البيئي اللي زميلتي منال شكل كتبت عنه فصل الكتاب، انه ايقاف اشكال التطبيع اللي مثل الان هي التطبيع البيئي الموجود في المنطقه.
Thank you very much both for being on time. Now moving to Mohamed Gad.
Hi, my sound is clear? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
I will not be able to, notify you that. So just.
Okay. Okay, I will go on. Thanks for invitation. As we all know that since 2014, Egypt has been gradually raising electricity prices to reflect the actual cost of producing energy. The original plan was to reach this goal in 5 years. Although it was extended a few times to ease the burden on consumers during times of high inflation, the 2014 program marked an important shift in the social role of the state in Egypt. Since the electricity industry was nationalized in 1948, it was seen as essential for modernizing Egypt and building a large middle class. The political elite of this era positioned the nationalization as an alternative welfare model to the privatized services provided by the European companies, which had dominated the electricity industry and other public services sectors since the 19th century. This view was not only continued but became more deeply integrated during the Arab socialism era between 1960s and 1980s, which saw a significant expansion of the electricity network, particularly in rural areas. Since 1990s, international financial institutions that heavily influenced macroeconomic and social policies argued that public services such as energy should not be socialized. They claimed that it would undermine efficiency of these services. As a result, they promoted BOT and BPP contracts to restore the role of private sector in public services. This approach was welcomed by the state in Egypt, as it offered alternative funding sources for modern infrastructure, while the IMF increased pressure to transition public finance from Keynesian deficit spending to a more austere monetarist approach. One of the earliest attempts to introduce BOT contracts in public services occurred in the electricity sector in Egypt, where private entities were permitted to produce electricity and sell it to the government company that was responsible for distributing it to the public. However, efforts to integrate the private sector into the electricity industry were undermined by the local currency depreciation against the US dollar in 2003. The government found itself replacing public producers with foreign companies that sold electricity in hard currency, while it's still retaining the social responsibility of subsidizing final consumer tariffs. In the year following the January 2011 revolution, the energy sector became highly politicized, with public criticism growing over frequent energy cuts, placing energy efficiency at the forefront of public concern. At the same time, IFIs continued to criticize the high spending on energy subsidies, which had become a significant burden after Egypt transitioned to a net energy importer. They called for reforms to rationalize and better target electricity subsidies, as well as for an increased focus on green energy. In response to these developments, the new political regime in 2014 sought to take swift and decisive actions to create the impression that the energy cuts issue would be resolved. They launched an ambitious plan to rapidly establish several fossil fuel based power plants, producing electricity far beyond the country's actual needs. This approach was later described by the researcher Mohamed Yunus as the burden of surplus electricity. The Egyptian Electricity Holding Company, which owns the public power plants, adopted a new finance approach for these plants. This method involved not only utilizing private entities to construct and transfer their technological expertise, but also to secure external financing for the projects. The EBC plus finance, engineering, procurement, and construction with financing. The huge investment burden on the Egyptian Electricity Holding Company was a good chance to justify the plan for gradual increasing of electricity tariff. So instead of involving private entities to produce electricity, the governmental entities were corporatized. Nearly a decade after 2014 plan, it became evident that the new investments could not guarantee stable energy services for the public. The core challenge was securing fossil fuel from external markets, particularly in the face of a hard currency shortage in recent years, coupled with the still marginal role of renewable energy sources. I argue that also public entities continue to dominate the electricity sector. the Egyptian economy has become increasingly integrated into the global financial system. This has led to a severe depreciations of the local currency between 2016 and 2024. With a shift in viewing electricity as a cost-based services rather than a social one, ordinary citizens have become more exposed to global financial fluctuations, largely influenced by decisions made by institutions like the US Federal Reserve. Thank you.
Thank you Mark, for your brief presentation. You just take 5 minutes, so we have more time for discussions or questions or comments. We have about 25 minutes. So, but I can start. Can I start with a question, because actually my question is about the Arabic translation, because I know there is Arabic and English versions, and I noticed that the title of the Arabic version is different from the English version, and I feel that the English title is very clear and reflect the content of the book, while the Arabic title, which is تحدي الرأسمالية الخضراء, a little bit light and doesn't reflect the content of decolonization. So why the Arabic title uses the word رأسمالية, not colonialية or استعمار?
Good question. Because there has been a discussion around the Arabic title of the book with the publisher. We thought that al-istimar al-akhdar, green colonialism, is not that common in the region and maybe misunderstood. So the publisher said maybe green capitalism would work more. But the idea, I don't think it's light as you say. So green colonialism is just a manifestation of capitalism. What we are seeing now is capitalism, green capitalism, it's renewable, sustainable, trying to expand to other parts of the world by reproducing the same neo-colonial dynamics. So at the heart of our problem is green capitalism. But the green capitalism manifests itself in different ways. Sometimes colonialism, sometimes neo-colonialism, sometimes privatization, sometimes liberalization of the sector. So yeah, that's the idea around that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can discuss this issue later, but now, yes, please.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding the Israeli angle, and that's totally the whole panel. I'm sure you have heard about the Union for the Mediterranean, USM. It's a big European organization that's majorly funded by the EU Commission. It includes not only the European partners, but the southern Mediterranean region, and I think including Jordan. And what happens is that the European side is trying to push for Israel to be included, including in discussions related to sustainability, to green technologies. And when you talk, people working the green technology aspect, when they talk with European universities, European research institutions, they tell us, like, you have your neighbors, Israel, go to them. And if you look at the EU PRIMA and the EU Horizon programs, research related to technologies and sustainability and green technologies, there is, if you have an Israeli partner, you get accelerated, because one of the objectives is basically to do the whole piece through development and through sustainability and stuff like that. So there is some sort of need to be a pushback against the European side, which could have good intentions, we're not sure, about the inclusion of Israel, the inconsistency of inclusion of Israel. And it has been sold out to certain populations within that region, for example, the GCC countries, that we need to naturalize ties with Israel so that we could procure the technology. While in fact, the technology could be procured very easily from the Indians, from the Chinese, Europeans, from Americans, because they pay for it. They really don't take technology for free. So in that regard, we see this a push by donor organizations to include Israel? And also, how do you see the inequitable access to tech transfer? Because in many technologies, there are regulations on exporting technology outside the country of origin. With Israel, these restrictions are lifted. So does that come into discussions, multilateral discussions? My other comments on governance, if you look at Jordan, if you look at Egypt, most of them Arab world, we are living in authoritarian regimes. So yes, while people, intellectuals like yourself, could raise concerns and alarms about such deals, but at the end of the day, the rulers don't care. They will pass on the agenda because the authoritarian regime relies on approval from Western powers, which push you to naturalize Israel. So I think the whole issue is a governance issue, is a democracy issue. If we have democracy, all these deals will be null and voided as corrupt deals to begin with. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm very excited to read this book. It's, I think, a very important opening for discussions. So I had sort of two questions. First, in the framing, you use the word green. And green for me, I'm a climate activist myself. I think green is in itself colonial in the sense that we don't live in green environments necessarily. Our local context looks very different. So when we're talking about green capitalism, let's not forget that the green side is also not natural, not organic. So my question is when, the second part of this is also, it focuses on energy, which is a mitigation strategy when we're looking at climate justice. And it really does, I didn't get a chance to read the book, but my question is, does the book focus on a just transition within the context of mitigation? So shifting the energy sector away from oil dependence and petroleum to renewable sources? Or does it also expand into the need for climate justice to include adaptation and the needs and the implications for local communities of this dependency on petroleum and what happened with the climate justice? So the focus on mitigation funding versus adaptation and loss and damage. The second, which Asmaa presented, which I would love to hear more, is you talk about shifting to a local a more localized, decentralized energy structures. I don't know, I can't even imagine that. So if you could sort of give me how would that work on a national level, regional level, on a city level, what does that look like? I think it would be very important, with a special attention to the needs of small communities like Dahab to have access, or Sinai, or smaller communities to have access to this energy that cannot afford it in any way, shape, or form. And it causes some huge financial burdens on the community and on the governance there.
Thank you guys, first of all. This is a very interesting topic, and I have a question that is related more to the policy and research side of it. So I want to understand what are your suggested research questions that are more related to the microeconomic aspect of it, more on the household level. Because I work in Jameel Poverty Action Lab. It's a research center that focuses on what works in combating poverty in several different sectors, and specifically the sector I work on in the environment, we focus on air and water policies, and our goal is to inform the policy making activities of governmental agencies to be more driven by evidence and more informed by data. So what we part of what we do would be to try to find the specific research questions and the gaps in the evidence that are needed in order to include this lens in the conversation when we're trying to generate evidence that is needed. So I would love to know what topics that are more micro-based, because the very macro type of ideas would not work in the type of research we do. So a lot of it decentralized, the energy stations and so on is very high level, but if we zoom in more on a more micro level that maybe related to households or individuals, or what are the impacts we can trace to a smaller like a smaller, more tangible research question that can be answered. I would love to know your input on that. Thank you.
First one, this meant the whole ecosystem, global ecosystem, is very much written with carbon. So, and even the Russians, when they have good reasons to get a big out of it, they have no problem to get a big out of it. So, depending on this narrative, the first question I'm going to ask you, what is the alternative? Yes, I understand we need to decolonize, but what are the alternatives? Now, the second part is that many of the issues that we talk about are self-inflicted. We talk about land grab. I mean, which is celebrated Saudi Arabia, is actually land grab. Yeah. And then actually, the army is instructed to use utmost force to remove the locals. Yeah, and I could argue Egypt used similar things, not with brute force like in the Saudi Arabians, but we do in the more structured ways. So actually, many of it is actually self-inflicted. I think Mohamed Gad talked about the Egyptian energy thing. There is still a mindset that I should be selling things to citizens with the same price that I could have found in exporting, which is a heresy, because the government has a little bit of a social mandate. Because if you're going to do this, they pay me salaries that are with industrial with global standards. Before you tell me I'm going to have to give you electricity or gas with global standards. So those are all things conflicted. So before you go to criminalizing, maybe you should clear our act first. Thank you.
I have a question. Okay, as someone who's not well versed in the world of environmental sciences and all of that, when we talk about a just transition, when we talk about equitable solutions, when we talk about non-extractive methods of producing energy and having these local solutions, I think throughout my life I've always heard of the different phases of solutions that were like espoused as the best ways to move forward. If we're talking about solar energy, if we're talking about any type of different renewable sources, if we're talking about the lie of the electric vehicles, right? So it starts off with this idea, and then I guess there's a commercialization of it, and then it turns into something very different than the ideas that are actually espoused. So when we look at the actual methods of renewable energy, and when we look at the details of all of this, when we look at solar panels, there's an extractivist aspect to it for the raw materials themselves. So what are the ideal solutions, actually? So if we're talking about the fact that every single method of energy production entails some sort of extractivism and it's horrific, detrimental, it has a horrific toll on communities in different parts of the world. Is our issue consumption? So whatever the solution is, the issue is that we consume too much? Or is there actually an ideal solution that kind of balances in between? And it's a very, I think, abstract question, but because I really do not know what does that even look like? How can we even think of something equitable and just, if these are the options, then where do we go from here?
Any one more question on where we can go? Yes, Banwar.
Thank you, Asmaa Mohamed.
اوكي انا بدي احاول ابلش بالنتيجه وممكن تعقيب بعدين. هلا يمكن انا احكي في الدكتوراه بيعقب على حمزه الموضوع في بعض التوجهات العالميه انه نسب الطلب من الطاقه لا يمكن تلبيتها عن طريق الطاقه المتجدده اساسا، عندنا مشكله نمو متسارع الطاقه المتجدده حتى لو حاولنا انه اليوم نحول على طاقه متجدده مش راح تمشي معها. هون بطرح سؤال انه هل الكونسبشن هي كمان الكونسبشن الانرجي قد هي فعلا توصيل الكوكب؟ هل هي اصلا مفيده يعني حتى على المستوى الاقتصادي هذا النمو المسارع؟ يعني هاي انا ما بعرف راي حمزه، بس انا هاي واحده من وجهات النظر. حتى القدرات الصناعيه في بعض البلدان نموها بهذا الشكل، الطلب الكبير مثلا حتى على مستوى بلدان اللي هي الصغيره الناميه حتى فيها النسب الاقتصاديه قليله، كمان في عندنا ترندز بالاستهلاك عاليه جدا، خاصه مثلا في القطاعات المنزليه. بدل يعني اليوم مثلا عندنا في منطقه مثلا في الاردن بزايد كثير على الطلب على الاير كونديشنرز وقصص بتستهلك طاقه كميات كبيره، صعب على اي ريسورس من الطاقه المتجدده نغطيها، فاحنا ممكن نزيد من الطلب على الطاقه البتروليه. فاذا ما كان في عندنا شيء نعمل يعني تخفيض لنسب النمو هاي، خاصه في القطاعات يعني مثلا مثل القطاعات المنزليه في دول ناميه رح ياثر مثلا على الاقتصاد. هي واحده من الشغلات. فهذا يمكن بارت الاجابه انت تطلع عليها. ما بعرف شو حمزه في رايك في الموضوع.
Mohammed, Gad, can you go ahead, please? Do you have answers?
Yes, I don't have a specific comments. I think most of questions were targeting Hamza, so I'm interested to hear Hamza.
There were many comments and questions. I'm not going to answer all of them, but I'll try to touch on ones that I think they are really important for our discussions. The question of Palestine. So I've written an article in a red paper called Imperialism, Climate Justice, and Palestine, and it has been translated into Arabic in a Safir Arabi. I really encourage you, because I developed the argument that Palestine liberation is not only a moral issue, is not just a late-stage decolonization struggle, but it's fundamentally also the struggle against US-led imperialism and global fossil capital. Because if you look at the political economy of the region, especially the Middle East, the two key pillars of US hegemony and domination in the region, politically, economically, and controlling the vast and rich natural resources, specifically oil and gas, are the settler colony of Israel. This is the first, pillar. The second pillar are the reactionary oil fossil fuel monarchies. And the rapprochement between these two pillars were, part of the efforts of the United States and other European countries to normalize the relations between Israel and neighboring Arab countries. So it's really important to see the struggle for Palestine liberation as also a struggle against US imperialism, but at the same time, global fossil capital, because the Gulf region, Middle East, is a central, a key nodal point in global fossil capital. So it's really important to center this in our discussion. And I urge you to read Manaj Qayyar's book in terms of the economalization happening in renewable energy, in desalination of water, in agro-business, and urging us to reconsider BDS as a central and key point in our struggles against all these forms of oppression. And you're right, the question of democracy is central to this. And we say it clearly, but we say just transition for us is about democratization. We don't use the word democracy because it has been bastardized. It's always liberal, bourgeois democracy. It's just about elections and no talk about economic justice, social justice. So democratization in the sense of involving local communities, local workers in important decision-making around how their resources are being used, how their land is being used, how their water is being used, and how they shape their economic, food, and energy system. That is democratization. Working people need to be at the heart of such projects. It's not just about elections, because I don't believe even if you have elections, you would have a say on who owns energy and who produces your own food. So democratization is in a radical, participatory, really rooted in struggles and people. So this is an important point. Green capitalism. Green capitalism is capitalism at the end of the day. It calls itself green, but it's not really green. It just perpetuates the same dynamics of dispossession, environmental destructions, and more extractivism. And actually, that touches on the point of Nadeem. What kind of alternatives that we are imagining? If, let's say, Western countries, or citizens in Western countries, and some rich pockets in the global south, including in the Gulf countries, would like to drive electrical vehicles, and each family maybe has 2 cars, that would mean more extraction. That would mean more extractions for nickel, for cobalt, for lithium, for graphite, for rare earth minerals, and that would mean more destructions for local community and the creation of sacrifice zones. And in here, it's really important to put the questions of degrowth. Degrowth in the global north and the richest pockets in the global south. And degrowth not for the poorest, but for the richest amongst us. If we're gonna continue in the same way of producing and consuming things, we are going into total destruction and collapse. So I think there is a degrowth movement in the global north, especially in the West, trying to push those arguments and connect them with anti-imperialist and decolonization ideas from the South. Because it shouldn't be degrowth for us. We are allowed to develop. We need to be allowed to develop and provide for our own people decent public services, decent housing, decent jobs. But the global north need to, to degrow to some extent. We cannot continue in the same way. There are ecological boundaries, and it's about, forming those transnational coalitions in order to push for that kind of pressure. Mitigation and adaptation. I just give a quick example to reveal the injustice of the whole thing. Tunisia, for example, is a small country, 10 million people. It's only responsible for 0.07% of CO2 emissions annually. 0.07%. So basically, it's not really responsible for causing the climate crisis either. But their strategy, their national strategy to tackle climate crisis, focuses on mitigation. Mitigation means reducing the CO2 emissions, doing renewable energies. 2 minutes. I'm not sure. I'll try. So they are focusing putting their money and energy into mitigation rather than putting the money into development and adaptation. Tunisia faces a huge drought, especially in the last 5 years, and they have water resource problems. So instead of putting the money there, they are putting it into building renewable energy projects, which is good, but that shouldn't be your priority. The priority is something. Here, the easiest explanation is, the ruling classes, they are stupid, they are corrupt, they are authoritarian. There is a lot of that. I agree. I come from, an authoritarian regime. I'm Algerian myself. But it's not the only story. Who dictates this? Who shapes this? It is international financial institutions. It is the German GIZ, German corporation. The German corporation has an office in the Tunisian Energy Ministry. Can you imagine that? This is colonialism. And they shape the way you think. They tell you need to put more money into these projects. We have the expertise, we're going to tell you how to do it. But no, Tunisians should be focusing on adaptation and development. And of course, using that potentiality in terms of producing renewable energy, first of all, to provide the electricity for themselves. Because Tunisia right now, 60% of its electricity comes from imported Algerian gas. So why is the priority always I produce the electricity for Europe? So it's really important when we talk about these things to see the priorities. The priorities in the global south is development and adaptation, and where there are possibilities, those projects should benefit the local populations first. And us in North Africa, we should start looking a little bit south. Why do we always look north? 600 million people in this continent do not have access to electricity. So why we don't share electricity with these people? Because capital tells you, those people are not going to pay for it. You know, who's going to pay more dollars for it? Is the Europeans. So we need to break away from that thinking. Energy should be a public good. A common should be a public service, like other public services. We shouldn't be commodified. And in here, your questions on alternatives. Look, alternatives, first of all, we need to start off making a solid diagnosis of what is happening. We need to shift the narrative, because the mainstream narrative does not talk about colonialism, dispossession, and privatization. They frame it as a good thing, renewable energy. But when you look at it, you find it's not. So one part of our role is reframing, you know, give a different narrative that is rooted on justice, that is rooted on sovereignty. Second, there are solutions in the short term, medium term, and long term. The long term for me is eco-socialism, and we can disagree on that. It's no problem. But in the short term, deprivatize, decommodify. I win. Energy should be seen as a public good. Democratize, we talked about it. Decolonize, de-link, this is a long-term, medium and long-term project. You decolonize and de-link from the imperialist capitalist system, and here we should connect with the ideas of an Egyptian artist, Samir Amin, who talked about فك الارتباط. فك الارتباط, not becoming isolated from the global economy, but building an economy looking inward, focusing on your priority. And in here, it means industrialization, to break away from the dependencies, to break away from the extractivist system that forces you just to export cheap natural resources. It means challenging the international financial institutions, challenging the free trade agreements that pushes you into really subordinate positions. And this cannot be done by one country. We should remember this. So South-South relations, these happen during the anti-colonial struggle, during the Bandung times. We need to revive those ideas, build transnational solidarity, not just at the level of states, but at the level of civil society, the level of trade unions, the level of universities, to come up with a counterweight project. Because these companies and countries in the north need us. They need our labor, they need our resources. Let's negotiate. If they do not want to give us the technology, let's play China against them. Let's get the technology from China. That's how you move up the value chain. That's how you build sovereign economies that really create value and wealth and jobs in our country. If we don't do that, we're going into green economy.
Thank you very much. Just in closing, I would like to extend my congratulations to you for your great research effort. And thank you all for joining us, contributing to this insightful and fruitful discussion. Thank you all very much. Please, I just invite you to, before leaving, to sign up here with my colleague Mahmoud, and feel free to get something from the coffee corner there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.